A security camera can catch everything: the ordinary, the suspicious, the mundane. And yet sometimes even the clearest evidence leaves us with no answers. Tonight we revisit one of America's most wrenching and persistently mysterious cases: the disappearance of 6-year-old Etan Patz, the boy who walked 2 blocks to a bus stop in Soho on May 25, 1979, and never came home. This expanded documentary revisits every lead, re-examines every suspect, and traces a decades-long struggle for truth that changed how a nation protects its children. Etan was a bright, curious child, the youngest of 3 in a close family, who lived in a loft apartment in Manhattan's Soho. On that sunny May morning, his mother let him walk alone to the bus stop for the first time. A short 2-block journey she believed was safe. He set off with his book bag and $1 for a soda, a small act of independence in a neighborhood that still felt like a village. By mid-morning, the unthinkable had happened. Etan did not board the bus, he did not come home, and his parents' hearts were suddenly carved out by a fear that would never fully heal. The initial search that day was immediate and intense. Neighbors, friends, and police scoured Soho's streets, alleys, and vacant lots. Missing child posters with Etan's photograph went up across the city and then across America. The image of his eager face became ubiquitous, projected in public squares and printed on milk cartons, a symbol of a new kind of public awareness about missing children. The case captured the nation's attention and helped catalyze movements and institutions dedicated to finding missing kids and preventing abduction. In the vacuum of evidence that first summer, investigators chased leads both close and far. Some threads were promising and then frayed. Others were later shown to be false hopes. Early suspects included local pedophiles and men known to loiter around children. One of the most discussed names over the years was Jose Antonio Ramos, a convicted child molester who once lived in the neighborhood and had come under suspicion. The Patz family pursued civil claims against Ramos, and in 2004, a civil court entered a judgment finding Ramos responsible in a civil sense for Etan's disappearance. A ruling that rested on a preponderance of evidence, not the criminal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Ramos always denied involvement, and criminal charges were never filed against him. Eventually, after new developments in the case, the Patzes asked the civil judgment against Ramos to be dismissed. For decades, the story of Etan existed in 2 parallel lines: the public legacy, milk cartons, new laws, National Missing Children's Day, and the private struggle of his parents, Stan and Julie Patz, who never stopped searching or petitioning for answers. Stan, a professional photographer, used his craft to keep Etan's face in the public eye. The family's perseverance kept the case active in police files and public memory, even as new leads grew scarce and cold. The case took another turn in 2010 when Manhattan prosecutors quietly reopened the file. Renewed attention over the next years culminated in a dramatic series of events that would again thrust Etan's name into headlines. In 2012, a lead prompted an excavation of a basement in Soho, conducted under intense media scrutiny and in the presence of cadaver dogs. The search produced debris and media adrenaline, but no human remains and no definitive evidence of Etan's fate. The disappointment was sharp, a flash of hope extinguished, and the searchers were left with the same haunting silence that had defined the case for decades. Just as the 2012 dig was closing, another development stunned the public. A former bodega clerk from New Jersey, Pedro Hernandez, was arrested after telling investigators he had killed Etan. Hernandez claimed that on May 25, 1979, he lured the boy into the basement of the bodega where he worked with the promise of a soda, strangled him there, and disposed of the body in the trash. His confession came more than 30 years after the disappearance, and investigators said his admissions included details not publicly known. Hernandez's statements renewed hope for the Patz family and launched a criminal prosecution that ultimately resulted in a murder conviction in 2017. The Hernandez case produced intense debate and division. Prosecutors argued his confession and corroborating details, including knowledge of Etan's clothing and a description of the act, supported a guilty verdict. Defense attorneys countered that Hernandez struggled with mental illness and that his confessions were unreliable, possibly influenced by suggestive questioning and a lifetime of personal turmoil. The first trial in 2015 ended with a hung jury. The second in 2017 ended with conviction. Hernandez was sentenced to 25 years to life. For the Patz family, the verdict offered a complicated form of closure. A name and a P, a prison sentence, but still no recovered remains, and still the long, aching absence that had defined their lives. Even after conviction, the case continued to evolve. In July 2025, a federal appeals court overturned Hernandez's conviction, finding that jury instructions at his trial regarding statements he made, some of which were unrecorded and obtained before Miranda warnings, were legally flawed and prejudicial. The appeals panel ordered corrective action and left open the possibility of retrial. Prosecutors have signaled intent to pursue further legal avenues, including appeals to higher courts, to reinstate the conviction. That development reopened wounds and legal questions. Was the person behind bars truly responsible? Had the prosecution overreached a fragile confession? Or had justice been achieved only to be rolled back on procedural grounds? The legal saga underscored the fragility of certainty in a case built largely on words rather than physical evidence. Beyond courtroom drama, the Etan Patz case left lasting institutional legacies. His disappearance helped lead to the founding of national infrastructures, hotlines, public service campaigns, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, dedicated to preventing child abduction and supporting families. The image of Etan on milk cartons became an iconic, if chilling, national symbol. The face of a missing child, carried into dinner rooms, grocery aisles, and living rooms, where the idea of stranger danger steadily entered the public imagination. The policy map of child protection in America was reshaped in part by the anguish the Patz family lived through and the attention their perseverance brought to the problem. But while the case reshaped policy and raised vigilance, it also highlighted the agonizing limits of the investigative system when evidence is thin and decades have passed. The early hours of any missing child case are critical. Witnesses are interviewed, physical evidence can be preserved, suspects can be identified. As years accumulate, memories fade, records are lost, and the trail frays. Etan's disappearance demonstrated how quickly a child's absence can become a riddle for the ages, and how families may be forced to trade the hope of immediate rescue for a lifetime of advocacy. To tell Etan's story fully is to tell the story of a neighborhood and a nation in transition. Soho in 1979 was not the polished gallery district it is today. It was a community in flux, where industrial buildings were being reclaimed by artists and working-class families lived alongside new arrivals. The city itself was different. Crime and urban disorder were rising. Trust in institutions was strained, and systems for rapid public notification of missing children didn't yet exist. Etan's disappearance exposed those gaps, sparking cultural and legislative responses that would shape the lives of future generations. There are moments in the Patz family's story that capture both ordinary tenderness and enduring pain. Stan and Julie kept Etan's bedroom much as he left it, a shrine that resisted the erosion of memory. They displayed his photographs in Times Square. They lobbied lawmakers. They sat with journalists and cameras, telling a simple story that I came too big for any one family to bear alone. Their grief and advocacy became a clarion call. Missing children are not statistics. They are family members with faces, names, and futures stolen from them. Over the decades, numerous theories and alleged sightings circulated in forums, on television, and among amateur sleuths. Every plausible tip had to be checked, every rumor chased. In 2012 and again later, excavations and searches were conducted in response to credible leads. Those searches consumed resources and emotions, and sometimes produced only small fragments, an item of debris, a thread of possibility, that could not be tied conclusively to Etan. Each negative result was a grief renewed for a family that had already endured a lifetime of negative results. A crucial tension in the story is the difference between civil adjudication and criminal conviction. Ramos's civil judgment versus Hernandez's criminal conviction, later overturned. Civil courts can declare responsibility by a preponderance of evidence, a lower bar than criminal courts. For the Patzes, the civil determination against Ramos in 2004 was a legal acknowledgement of their belief that he had harmed their son. Yet because criminal prosecutors sought proof beyond a reasonable doubt, Ramos remained off the criminal docket for Etan's disappearance. That mismatch exemplifies the legal complexities families face when pursuing truth across different venues and evidentiary standards.